Hi, this is Swapnil Bhartia and welcome to another episode of TFR Insights. And today we have with us Ran Ilany, CEO of Portshift. Ran, first of all, thanks for coming to the show.
Thank you. Very glad to be with you guys.
Since we're talking for the first time, I would like to know a bit more about Portshift. What do you guys do? What problem you saw in the market that you wanted to solve that the Portshift is trying to solve for the community?
So essentially, Portshift is an identity-based workload protection platform which covers an end-to-end, Kubernetes security challenges, starting from visibility perspective of the containers at runtime to the actual networking perspective of the security. Protecting the security context at runtime, which is also part of the major concerns that we have nowadays, covering the API-based access to the Kubernetes clusters as another, attack vector. And while doing so, while covering the end-to-end perspective of the protection itself, the solution is a SaaS-based. Where it does not require any specific, on-prem installation, and it's provided as a service to the community itself.
The crisis that we are going through right now, it's everybody is moving their workloads to online. They're all working from home, which kind of creates a unique challenge for security, something that you never even envisioned or thought about that. Because when you go to your office, you have all those, you have built a castle, inside you have your firewalls, but suddenly now everybody is outside of the castle. So there are a lot of things, for example, when you look at zero trust, security, that becomes very critical now because you cannot trust anything. So can you talk about, the Portshift, the security and the crisis that you're facing? And something it's going to be even more interesting, that is that once we are through this crisis, a lot of things that we learn will affect how people build their infrastructure in the future. So let's start from the beginning, which is what are the unique security related challenges that COVID has created for companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a very good question, and I believe it's very relevant since obviously if the working assumption was like before the last month, a couple of months, was that every developer is essentially hosted on at least most of them are on-prem. The new situation is that essentially the developers most of them are moving obviously to work remotely, and then the question or organization asks themselves whether the same criteria that was on-prem are kept exactly identical to the new the new situation, such as whether again the pipeline is secure to its full extent, whether again the access of the users to the actual pipeline is obviously secure, whether you are working on the cloud or on-prem. But I believe the main working assumption that changes is the fact that the person that is standing behind the keyboard can be not the person that was before. We were always assuming that the guys that are kicking the build button within the pipeline was our guy. So again, how can we be sure that the result or the runtime containers which will be deployed obviously at runtime are our assets obviously? How can we make sure that once we detect something bad which has happened, we can actually block it obviously to happen at runtime? And last but not least, how we prevent things to break. So I think those are the new challenges that we are facing nowadays, specifically when we see that 95, even almost 100% of the developers are working from home, and this really brings, I would say, a strategic question of essentially how do you protect the runtime? Okay, so now if before again the runtime protection was obviously very important. Now, I think it's even more important to protect your runtime, because now we need to make sure that, again, everything that goes out to the runtime is essentially our assets, and we obviously need to be able to correlate between those assets or those containers to the actual owners. Again, the guys that are standing behind the keyboard and clicking the, or hitting the build button in order to, again, to deploy the container.
How do you support and enable developers or DevOps team or DevSecOps team to actually whatever lessons we have learned to actually put them into practice?
Yeah, so this is again a very good, I believe this is a very good a very good question, since obviously when you want to protect your runtime and you want to protect services to developers, you need to make sure that the whole pipeline is protected from the beginning of, I would say, the journey of the pipeline to the runtime itself. So I'll say that the first thing that we need to make sure that, again, what goes out, okay, the artifact or the container that are going out there are scanned, and obviously they are sort of whitened before they go into runtime. The second thing that we obviously need to make sure is that the actual runtime context, okay, what is going out there. Again, the containers will run on the correct privileges, capability to access local resources such as the networking or even the storage devices. And obviously once we make sure that those workloads are sort of whitened, the next thing that we'd obviously like to do is to provide some sort of a digital identity, obviously, so that once those assets are deployed, we have a really, I would say, mathematical way to prove that those assets are ours, and that is to say, to be able to distinguish between what came from the pipeline and obviously what didn't came from the pipeline. Functionality that again we'd like to have to preserve at runtime. That was what was like 30 minutes ago. When after 15 minutes we detect that again we have a vulnerability or maybe a runtime context which break the security, we'd obviously like to be able to protect. And last but not least, we'd like to protect the network. Again, those containers at runtime are obviously communicating. We'd like to be able to move from the trust model, which is based on IP ports and protocol, to the identity of the workload, which again was generated during the pipeline itself. So those are the scope that once we talk about protecting the code that the developers are generating. This is sort of the I would say that the scope of what we are dealing with. And since again we are talking about a modern environment which are very, very fast, very, very agile, we need to do everything that I've just described baked in within the pipeline. We cannot really be, as security officers, we cannot be the guys that sort of stop the business or stop the process or the agility of obviously of what's going to be deployed. And this is I would say it's equally important as providing the actual security level for both the pipeline and the runtime that I've just been speaking about.
When you think about cloud native workloads, we are talking about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. A lot of workload runs in your data centers. Some you want to move something to AWS, something to Azure, something to GCP. So how do you enable because when it comes to identity management, sometimes they also offer their own identity management. Amazon has their own, Google has their own. So how do you help your customers to be able to just like you use a passport across countries, you just show the passport to the immigration and you can just go through that. So can you talk about that piece of it?
Actually, we are as a philosophy we are not pushing any specific standard of scanning or vulnerability scanning as a company. Actually, in the contrary, we have released a couple of weeks or so a new open source technology which we call Kubei, which has a capability to scan at runtime all of the artifact without any hurdle with integrating with the pipeline itself or with the CI/CD. So with this philosophy, essentially, the platform or the solution itself is enabled with the almost immediate integration with other solutions such as AWS or GCP, as you eloquently mentioned. Those type of scanning solutions, so that again, once we know that those artifacts are whitened, then we can obviously protect the runtime. The point is that there can be a lot of sources for scanning. The actual runtime protection is obviously based on the result of the scanning that we can integrate with other obviously vendors that are out there, because again, as you eloquently mentioned, there are lots of those other.
Tell a bit more about Kubei and also your engagement with the open source community. Is this the first open source project from Portshift, or you have been involved with other open source projects as well? That is number one. Number two is that we'll talk about Kubei a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So with pleasure. So we are very, very active with the open source community, specifically in areas like in the service mesh with Istio. This is an area that we are working with, again, with the open source community, contributing code to the network security part of Istio Service Mesh. Specifically with the scanning technology, as I mentioned formally, we have released the Kubei open source component, which it's pretty unique in the sense that nowadays I would say scanning solution are obviously we have a lot of solution out there, but there are some challenges which essentially are derived from the fact that we need to integrate those solution with CI/CD pipeline, which obviously takes time and it's complex to some extent. Two, you really need to, in order to scan runtime, I mean those type of scanners, you really need to have a daemon set or an agent which is essentially deployed on every node, which is again hurdle and challenging to some extent in some environment. And there are also the pure security perspective, which is even if you have those type of scanners that are integrating with the CI/CD, you don't really scan everything that is going out there, because Kubernetes by itself brings additional images to the runtime. So obviously you'd like a solution to essentially be able to cover an end-to-end, I would say, of your images at runtime. And this is the motivation of Kubei, essentially, to provide the community a very, very I would say cost-effective, efficient way to scan the Kubernetes artifacts. And the way it works is essentially one YAML installation on top of the Kubernetes cluster essentially enables scanning of all of the runtime artifact, including again stuff that come from the pipeline, including artifact that come from the Kubernetes cluster. The fact that there isn't any agent which is deployed at any given moment at any node, obviously, really means that we are covering all of the span of the artifact which are out there. And last but not least, it's very, very efficient, again, because we are scanning what is relevant, what is running on the runtime, rather than obviously unrelevant images that are in the database of the pipeline or the CI/CD and are not really relevant of what you are doing there out there. So again, it's a very, very efficient I would say a cost-effective solution that we wanted to provide the community, more in the spirit of the Kubernetes world, or in Kubernetes native. As a next step, what we are doing and thinking to do with Kubei is to integrate Kubei in our own platform, so that provide I would say more premium capabilities, such as combining between the scanning to I would say remediation capabilities. So let's say what happens if you find at runtime that a specific workload has specific vulnerability. Let's say that you want to confine its communication capability or its runtime capability. This is something that we think as a premium capability with a policy base attached. You can actually support it, and this is the combination of or the strategy of using both open source and premium capabilities, which obviously brings more value to our obviously to the community and our customers as well.
What kind of community are you looking at building around Kubei?
So again, the community is mainly DevOps, DevSecOps, SREs. We found that though the guys that are running the Kubernetes infrastructure probably will be more relevant, but not only, even the developers themselves. I mean, this is a very, very, I'll say very, very powerful tool as a developer to just, check out your code. Even, in today's environment, you can very, very easily, since you are working from home, download a piece of code from the website, compile it locally, as a developer, you'd like to have a very, very simple way to obviously scan your code. And again, without the hurdle of integrating with CI/CD, you'd like to have something which is lightweight. We have actually, developed this type of capability specifically for this purpose. Again, so that the developers will be also able to use this tool and to their own purposes, of course.
What is your long-term plan for Kubei in terms of sustainability? Are you going to keep it as a company-maintained project, or are you planning to contribute it to a neutral foundation?
So we are actually planning to give the Kubei to a neutral foundation. Again, we think that bringing something which is much more lightweight to the community will bring a lot of good. And it will improve the security level of folks that are deploying new code, specifically with the Corona age. That again, we have a lot of code that is going out there. We want to help the community. Obviously, the more advanced capability which are relating to Istio service mesh with the combination of Istio, this is something that is going to be integrated with our own platform as a solution.
Ran, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and talking to me today. And I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.